I think they refer to it these days as a cock-up. I'm down to talk about helicopters, which I'll be very pleased to do at an appropriate time, but in actual fact, I told someone who shall remain unnamed at this stage that I'd be very happy to tell them a story about a flight from Sydney, from Perth to, or Jandakot to Bankstown in a Mooney Turbo 252. And anyhow, it somehow appeared in the news circular as a helicopter. Perhaps the person I was talking to didn't know whether a Mooney 252 was a fixed wing or a helicopter. I don't know, but however, I'm not going to talk to you about helicopters. In 1984, I was appointed to the AMP Principal Board in Sydney, which necessitated a monthly visit to Sydney for the board meeting. I had used a Mooney M20K, which I'd bought from George Adams at Adams Aviation, Bankstown, and as a matter of fact, Courtney and I actually flew it from Bankstown to Jandakot on its first flight back in 1984. And when we were over Xanthus and the light was fading at the end of the day, we suddenly found all of the engine instruments were rapidly going into the red, and obviously the power of the engine was fading. Fortunately, we had a fair amount of altitude, and so there was nothing at Xanthus. It's only a siding. So we just carried on and did a very slow descent into Kalgoorlie onto reduced power, and fortunately made it. And then found afterwards that the aircraft had blown an exhaust gasket, and this red hot exhaust was virtually coming over the engine and making everything very overheated. We had that fixed up and got it back to Perth. Well, I had a lot of trouble with that aeroplane. It had a nice airframe, let me put it that way. The engine was a disaster, and I had a lot of trouble, and I put up with that until 1988. I think I've been on that board from about 86, when I acquired from George Adams, the same chap with whom I became very friendly. He was a great guy, but unfortunately he had a few tendencies that are common amongst used car salesmen, and you weren't too sure whether he really had fixed up the aeroplane properly in the first place. Never had a licensed engineer on his staff. He used to farm it out somehow or other. Anyhow, Court and I went over to, we ordered this aircraft, and it was a turbo Mooney 252. Now, 252 is the maximum airspeed of this particular model Mooney in knots, not in kilometres per hour or in statute miles per hour. That's its top speed. Now, the 252 has a rated altitude of 28,000 feet, and it is turbocharged, intercooled, and is an absolutely fascinating aircraft to fly. Unpressurised, and I'd ordered it with long-range tanks because I knew I'd have this Sydney flight every second month. Oh, I should explain, I'd go 1 month commercial, and the next month I would go in the Mooney. The first trip to Sydney was a most eventful one, and this is the one I want to talk to you very briefly about. We were wearing oxygen masks, of course, unpressurised aircraft, and the weather forecast indicated that we were going to have wonderful tail winds. We got to 25,000 feet, flight level 250, and weren't happy with the ground speed, which you get, of course, from a DME indicator, distance measuring equipment. And I said to Court, look, I think we'll climb a bit higher. And as we climbed from 250 to 270, the DME ground speed indicator just kept going up and up and up. And I said to Court, have a look at the DME. So we couldn't believe this, and we got up into the jet stream at 27,000 feet. I could have gone to 29 perhaps, but if you're flying east, you have to fly at odd altitudes. Flying west, you're flying at even altitudes. So we got to 27,000 feet, and we had a ground speed of 350 knots, which is the equivalent of about 610 kilometres per hour in a single engine Mooney. And in my next position report, when I had to tell them that I was at the next position, we naturally arrived there a little bit early. And I semi-apologised for this, but I mentioned the fact that we had a ground speed of 350 knots. And a voice came over the radio from further up saying, "What's that guy flying at 270? And control came back and said, "It's a single engine Mooney." And the reply came, "I don't believe it." And it would be hard to believe that a single engine aircraft could be flying at 610 kilometres per hour ground speed. It was a fascinating trip and one that I will never forget. What we did, unfortunately, I hadn't filed for a speed record, because that takes about a month anyhow. It was our first flight in this brand new Mooney, and so I didn't worry about it. But I think in my logbook I have the unofficial record of 6.5 hours Jandakot to Bankstown. Thanks for listening to me.